are a gift from God and they are a blessing. But how do you know if you're ready to be a parent? If you're considering having kids, but you're just not sure that you're ready yet, there are some things to consider first. And we're going to talk about those today. Thanks for joining us today on the Awesome Marriage Podcast. We're going to dive right into the topic. So, Dr. Kim, is there a way to know if you are ready to have kids?
I think so, and I think it's a question most couples deal with at some point, and I think some people, depending on their age, might feel more pressure, like we're kind of running out of time, and so
Mm,
I think prayer is a place to go to start with, and just ask God, reveal to us, are we ready? Are there things that you want us to do or improve on or
mm,
learn before we have kids, and kind of let God guide you in that.
mhm,
I think you can talk to other people who have kids and kind of ask their opinion, people that you trust, people that are
mhm,
probably in your church that believe what you do, and kind of ask them about their process.
mhm,
Those, especially who've had one or two kids, I think that's always valuable. And to kind of, if you've got any struggle questions or what, did you struggle? Ask them, did they struggle with this? What was
mm,
that like? How did they know when they were ready? I think it's also important to kind of look at your family of origins and how
mhm.
you grew up and what parenting styles were like, because minute the baby's born, you start parenting. I mean, it's
Mhm.
at that point it's more changing diapers and feedings and all that kind of stuff. But I think what you want to make sure is that you're on the same page with your spouse. I don't think
Mhm.
God is going to tell one of you it's time to have a child and one of you it's not time to have a
Mm,
child. And so if there's that difference, why is that difference? Is there
mhm.
maybe that one of them has a fear? And
Mhm.
so that's why they're saying no, and they haven't really worked on that yet. So maybe
Mhm.
talking to someone, counseling can help you discover that. But you definitely want to get the point where you feel like you're on the same page with it.
Mhm.
And if you are, and you feel peace, I think it's time. And some people go through that process. Some people just get pregnant, and they
Mhm.
never think, oh, are we ready for kids? Well, we're
Mhm.
pregnant, so I guess we better be ready. So,
Yep.
but if you're in that situation where you guys are really trying to think it through, I think those steps would be really helpful.
Mhm. I think that's really good too, and I really love that you mentioned if the couple's not on the same page, because I do think that can happen really easily, is that you're not on
Yes.
the same page, and I think too, I think there could be fear on either side, fear of saying yes or fear of saying no. A lot of times in the process, it's easy to think, it's up to us, that we have to, like, go ahead and make this happen, if
Yeah.
you're trying, or you have to race the clock or whatever it is, or there can be fear to take this step to try to have kids.
Yeah. And I think it too, deciding how urgent is it for you? I mean, do you
Sure.
really want to start doing all the stuff that might help, like counting days and temperatures and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, or do you just kind of want to flow with it? And
Mhm.
that can vary from couple to couple.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah,
so
that's true. Yeah. So to get into what it might look like if a couple does decide that they're ready and they're able to have a baby, or bring a baby into the family, how do you see marriages changing after a couple has their first baby?
it's kind of interesting. One of our team members, Lara, is pregnant and getting ready to have a
Mhm.
baby, and she and I, she was over our home, and we were doing some video stuff the other day, and we were just beginning to talk about that, and she said she just realized she and her husband have been married about a year and a half, close to two
Mhm.
years, and they have um, a lot of freedom. They have
Mhm.
flexibility. They can
Mhm.
go to dinner on spur of a moment. They can decide we're going to go to this spur of a moment. And she was saying that's all going to change. And so in
Yeah.
some ways, it's like freedom you enjoy does change, because all
Mhm.
of a sudden you've got a third person that it's not like your pet that you can set them aside for a while. You don't have to have a babysitter, things like that. You've got,
Right.
and so I think, and your flexibility changes. So I think those are things I think going into to being aware of
Mhm.
that they're going to have some changes there. Because I've had some couples that really didn't talk about that, and maybe one
Mhm.
person was aware of it and one wasn't, and so one
Mm.
stays home more with the child and the other's out kind of doing the things they did before. Well, that's not
Mhm.
usually going to work really well.
Yeah.
You've got to both do this together and know that this is going to change your lives in some ways for both of you.
Mhm.
But it's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of it. I think the fact of that being tired is, we're just, most of us don't do well when we're tired.
Mhm.
And so I think, I don't know any couple that's had a baby that they weren't exhausted, because
Mhm.
it's, night feedings, it's crying, it's trying to figure out what's wrong, or how do we get this kid to sleep. And so you're tired, and I think you have to
Mhm.
be careful with that you don't take that tiredness out on your spouse, that frustration sometimes you feel. I think your focus shift. It's like, okay, it's been us, but now we've got to include this
Mhm.
baby and the time and attention that goes to that. So I think all those things. And then I think the other thing is you realize maybe marriage has been pretty easy the first year and a half. You're together all the time. You don't have many, you've got a lot of freedom with that,
Mhm.
that if our marriage is going to grow through this, we've got to be intentional about our marriage. And I think
Mhm.
some people go a while and don't realize that. And maybe they get 6 months in or something to having a child and realize, we love our baby. We love having a child, but we're not as close as we used to be because you
Mhm.
haven't taken those times to connect. So those are the kind of things that came to my mind that we, I think, experience and that I see couples experience now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to consider. Especially when you haven't been in those shoes before. It's hard to
Right.
know
You don't get a
exactly how it'll
practice
change.
kid. I mean, God doesn't
Right.
just say, "Oh,
Right.
here's your practice kid, and then
Right.
then we'll do the real thing." No, that doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can always babysit a little bit, but that's not really it's not really
No,
the
because
same.
you get to
Nope.
go home.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. And I mean, they're all different. Every single child is so different. You can't predict, anything about how they're gonna respond or behave from the gate, like, immediately.
and so you've seen that with your 4 kids, that the
Yeah.
difference in each one of them.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's amazing to me how quickly you can see the differences in personality. I mean, you're talking about being flexible. So our firstborn, Stella, she was just we called her a party baby. She loved being around people. Loved being out, it wasn't like we were out like all night or something, but it was
Yeah,
like we could go to dinner with friends and she would just go, "Oh, I loved it." As a baby would just light up and see everyone, and no one really in my friend group had many kids yet. She was one of the first, but it was just kind of like almost like a novelty. It was so
yeah,
fun. But then she hit a point where she kind of wanted to be in her bed at bedtime. She wasn't as flexible anymore, and that was fine. That was healthy. But we had to go, okay, now we've lost some of that flexibility, and how are
sure,
we going to deal with this? But on the other hand, we had friends who had dogs. They had gotten dogs as newlyweds, and we realized like, okay, you can eventually the child will probably be out of diapers, but the dog will never walk itself. So you're going to go through these different seasons with the
that's
child
right,
where they gain more flexibility or grow out of phases. That puppy always needs you to come home and let it out.
that's
So that
right,
was so
that's right.
funny to watch.
I think
Yeah.
that's a really good point, that it is seasons, and
Hmm.
sometimes some seasons are easier than others.
Hmm.
The changing diaper part of it wasn't my favorite, but it didn't last forever.
It does not. Mm-mm.
And I was more motivated to help our kids get potty trained
Right.
because of that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that was a funny thing to me, the surprise of when we had been able to take her out and she would sleep in her little baby seat or whatever. I was like, oh, this is
Yeah,
nice. And then when that wasn't like that anymore, we had to change some things, but it was really good for her. And so we got used to it, and it was really
sure.
and then it would became, oh, well, it's predictable. We know when she's going to go to sleep, so we can plan around that. We could put her to bed and then, have a friend over, whatever kind of thing like that. So you just kind of go with the season.
I think that's a good point, that you guys made you didn't ask her to change because she
Mhm.
didn't understand that anyway. You
Right.
and Brian figured out, okay, we know her schedule now,
Mhm.
and so we can plan around that. And I think
Mhm.
that's important, instead of trying to make a kid. And I've seen some couples do that, fit their schedule. Well, no
Mhm.
wonder your baby's cranky all the time. You
Right.
know,
Right. Yeah, and some kids are go with the flow a lot more than others. Is an
absolutely.
interesting
And
thing.
yeah,
They
just
yeah.
go with the personality of your child.
Yeah, yeah. And it takes learning. It takes some time. So, it's a process. So, I'm curious, how did
Yeah.
this play out for you and Nancy when you first became parents? Like, what were some of the big shifts and changes you dealt with?
Well, I think when we'd been married 5 years and we
Mhm.
really had enjoyed that time, and I think we were really ready
Mhm.
for a child to be in our family,
Mhm.
and I think we just had come to that point. We'd done all the stuff we wanted to do as singles.
Mhm.
We were the first ones in our group to get married, both
Mhm.
sides, and but it was just time, and so it was it's something we look forward to. It was
Mhm.
something that we were on the same page with. I can remember when Grant was just a baby, we'd lay him on a blanket on the living room floor and just stare at him.
Mhm.
every little thing movie made would go, oh, that is
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
so we were totally enamored with him. Giving up the freedom was not that hard for us because I think we were ready for kind of we were ready to enter that next step
Mhm.
of being parents and knowing that would look different
Mhm.
by looking at our families and other people who did have kids
Mhm.
and seeing how their life changed. We had a couple of friends that they had a child. And so we'd call and say, hey, can you go to dinner night? And they go, well, no, remember we
Mhm.
have a child. Oh, yeah. And so we knew some of those things were going to happen. But we kind of did what you said you all did with stuff. We took Grant everywhere. If we
Mhm.
met friends for lunch at a hamburger place, Grant in his little baby thing sat on the
Mhm.
table and entertained everybody. He
Yeah.
loved people just
Yeah.
like you said she did.
Mhm.
Or he'd sleep and he
Mhm.
was great. We took him everywhere. We didn't grow up in COVID. We didn't have stuff like that. We didn't have anything
Mhm.
that restricted us from thinking, oh, is this a good idea or not? And part of it, we were just stupid. And so we just took him everywhere we went. Uh, and then I think what we didn't do well for at the first few weeks, and probably that was pretty normal. We didn't have date nights, but everything was good and we were enjoying it. And then one of us said, "Hey, we need to get back to our date night." So it was probably maybe 3 months into it that we started getting a sitter at that time every Saturday night. We had a
Mhm.
sitter lined up, and I think that helped us a lot because of the weeks when Nancy was tired or I was tired and we didn't get as much connection time, we both knew that Saturday night we were going to have that time together. And so it
Mhm.
wasn't like we were just putting this on forever. It was just a few days or
Mhm.
whatever. If we hadn't connected well in the week, we knew we had the date nights. I think that was a huge deal for us about
Mhm.
keeping our marriage a priority during that time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good one.
What
That's
about
good.
you
So,
guys?
well, can I ask a follow-up question first? So you said
Yes,
you
sure.
had you had date nights within the first couple months? When
About the third month.
Okay.
Uh, Now, Nancy, my parents were in town. We had other friends.
Mhm.
Nancy found a retired nurse
Mhm.
that because she felt she was a pediatric nurse. So she said, we're going to use her for a while, which was
Mhm.
great. Oh, but this time, she was a great lady. She came in her uniform, which made
Uh-huh.
Nancy feel so.
Yes.
I mean, and this is when they wore the whites,
Yeah.
the real kind of uniform type thing, not the things that got kind of the more comfortable today, which was great, And so the bad thing was she lived about 30 minutes away, but
Oh,
so that's who Nancy wanted, and so I would drive. The hard thing was when would have a date and maybe we'd had dinner and we were feeling pretty romantic and I'd run the
yeah.
sitter home. Well, 30 minutes, Nancy was asleep all the time when I got home.
Yeah.
So it was there was a downside to that too. Uh,
Oh,
but that I think she found somebody, and after that we began to use others. And not we didn't keep my parents. My parents were very good about keeping the kids, but they were really active too, and
mhm.
they were busy, and so
Mhm.
we knew if we wanted to do every Saturday night, it would be better if we had someone that we paid and we
Yeah.
knew was going to be consistent in being there.
Yeah, that's
So that
good.
yeah, that's kind of how that played out. And then after that, we got, I think as we became more comfortable and realized he wasn't breakable,
Mhm.
that we had some great teenage girls in our church that later on
Mhm.
babysit our kids and some things like that, people that we really trusted. And so that worked out well too.
That's great. That's such a good, like, important encouragement that you can find somebody you trust to take care of your baby and it will be fine and you'll be better for it because you get that connection time like you were saying.
And I think
So
as a husband, I had to realize that Nancy looked at it different than I did.
mhm.
It was hard for her to leave him that first
Mhm.
time, even for a couple hours. And so instead of getting upset, I had to learn how to, yeah, I get this, and it's going to get
Mhm.
better as time goes on, and it did. It did.
Mhm.
And then I think Grant was probably 6 months old when we left him overnight for the first time with my parents, and uh, we went from Oklahoma City to Dallas for a football game and spent the night. And it was hard for
Mhm.
some ways for Nancy, but we came back. He was still there. My parents had done a good job. They hadn't killed him,
Mhm.
and so that was a big step too.
Yeah, that's
But I
good.
think a husband needs to understand that most of the time our wives are probably going to look at it a little bit different than we do.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was always protective, but I also just thought this is something we need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really would be helpful to get on the same page about, because I think it does. I think it probably does look different from the wife's
I think so.
perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when we first had started having kids, we were in the camp that we didn't ever plan to. We got pregnant. It was just, not really something intentional on our part. And so we were married about 11 months before we were pregnant. And then it was pretty surprising for us, but also exciting. And so we had really struggled with like we didn't have a great like free time together. The way we were both working part-time, multiple jobs, we were still in school. And so we didn't have regular date night. We didn't have a lot of time we saw each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing we got pregnant because we were like,
Yeah.
our shifts were opposite,
Yeah.
and we were so busy just all the time making these things happen. Like
Sure.
Ryan was starting this college ministry. It was exciting. We were working. We were finishing school. So we had a lot going on. So for us, having a baby was kind of forced us to say, okay, we have got to take a look at how this is going, because we want to be able to be a family that has dinner together, that, we do things together. And so we started to kind of slow down a little bit,
Yeah.
and just start to settle in a little bit more. Whereas before we kind of were thinking, okay, we're just going through this for this time period until we get out of school, or until we get a more established situation. It was just, we were okay with being a little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
Because we were young, we were making things happen. And then we kind of were able to wrangle with and wrestle with, like, what do we want to establish for a family now? Like, we have to grow up because we're having a child.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How old were you guys when Stella was born?
23.
Okay. So we were 25, 23. Okay. Nancy was 23. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. About the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we were young, and
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah. So we just had to take a look at that, and then go from there. And it was good. So it was kind of a fun transition, but maybe that's part of why we were kind of, flexible with our parenting, is because we were just trying to figure out what it was like to be normal and hang out at normal times. And it was fun. It was fun.
I think I love you said that, but it's fun, because I think we would say that about almost every stage.
Yeah.
With kids. That doesn't mean it was always easy, but it was fun.
No.
And I think it's your perspective and how you look at it. And I think what helped us is somebody had said to us, just value every day with that child. That they, you hear the thing, they grow up quickly, and ours did, and our grandkids are growing up, and you have a daughter that's going to be a senior next year. And so I think just take that perspective of just cherishing every day, even when it's dirty diapers and all that kind of stuff that you don't like that well. I don't know anybody ever liked dirty diapers, but and so but realize that that's a stage, and you're not going to be changing them forever, and then you go to another stage. And so I think we did a pretty good job of trying to embrace and enjoy each stage. For fun, some were more fun than others, sure, but they were all valuable.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's hard, because I remember, like, just in thinking back to those first days, it was surprising to us that sometimes, you're trying to learn how to take care of this baby, and you don't really know. And you're reading books, and the nurse has said some things at the doctor's office, or whatever you've got, you're just grabbing onto. But there were times where she would just cry and cry, and we could not figure out how to stop. And that was such a surprise that, like, as a parent, you're like in this transitional phase, like you were saying, you're exhausted, we're so tired, trying to have grace with each other and not be snappy. But there were times when she would just cry and cry and cry. We didn't figure out how to stop it, or maybe she was just figuring things out just in some of those really early days. And we were not cherishing those moments, but those moments, it was okay. Like, she made it through. She wasn't suffering. She just had something bothering her that she couldn't tell us about. We couldn't understand what she was trying to communicate. And so there were times we just had to say, okay, the most important thing right now is that we just don't, like, lose it, that we don't get, because you get so frustrated. And so there were times where, like, well, maybe we'll just put her in the little bouncy seat and let her bounce. Maybe, so you're just kind of trying stuff. But I think it was an important lesson of just, sometimes it's not going to go great. It's not going to be a great moment all the time.
Right.
But that's just a moment.
No. Right. The first 3 months of Grant's life, he was colicky. And we knew he was colicky, and we had a few things the doctor told us to do. But the only thing that really helped him is getting him in the car and riding him around. So there were times at 2:00 in the morning, after he had cried for an hour, that we got to get in the car.
Yeah.
And we got to drive, and we
Yeah.
get in the car and he'd go to sleep. And then we were able, once he got to sleep like that, we were able to get him in and get him in his bed. But
Mhm.
you kind of learn out what works. The
Mhm.
bouncy seat was always a good thing because sometimes
Mhm.
that seems to distract him, or the swing. The car was the magic thing with him, and it was a lot of his life. He was still, when he was older, would be going somewhere and he'd go to sleep in the car, at 10 years old,
Yeah.
just like that.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's funny.
but you do I mean, it's kind of fun when you look back that you figured it out together,
Yeah.
and it was tired, and when you spend an hour driving around at 3 in the morning, it's
Mhm.
not a lot of fun,
No.
but it was something that we felt like we need to do.
Yeah, and it's like if you find those tricks that work, it's like you're gonna try those tricks at that point because
It,
you're
it Yes, it's
need some
better
help.
than listening to him cry for another
Yeah,
hour.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so
Exactly.
I think it's just it's good at like it's easy in retrospect to say, "Oh, it was so sweet. We cherished it all, but we didn't love every moment, but overall, it was really great." So
Yeah, yeah,
so there's
it
some things you
is.
just can't prepare for or control with your kids. So in the
No.
in the counseling room, are there certain surprises that couples tend to have not thought about or prepared for before they had kids?
Well, I think some of the things that we're talking about, some of the things you don't really think about. What do you do
Mhm.
when the baby cries and they
Mhm.
can't talk?
Mhm.
I mean, those kind of things. I think I've had a couple of someone, I think a lady and a couple of people have said to me that they just didn't really realize how much they could love a
Mm.
baby.
Mhm.
That something that could do absolutely nothing for
Mhm.
themselves, but this that love there, and how God continues to give you love. And I think you
Mhm.
find that as you have more than one child, you think,
Mhm.
okay, this child has been so special for whatever we've had before we've had the second one.
Mhm.
And just to realize that, okay, God loves all of us the same. And I think He will give us the ability to do that with our kids. And
Mhm.
He does.
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, first one got 100% love. This one
Mhm.
gets 75%. Third
Right.
one probably get 50. No, that you love them. You're able to love all of them
Mhm.
100%. And like you said, they all have different personalities. So I think that is, I think one of the things a lot of couples that can surprise them sometime are the financial costs. I mean,
Mhm.
especially, and then like with what people have gone through some this year, formula shortage,
Oh, yeah.
and people that were dependent on formula. I know I've had one couple I work with, and the baby, she wasn't able to breastfeed. It did the baby that didn't work for the baby. They tried 3 or 4 formulas that didn't work. Find ones that work, and all of a sudden you can't find it.
Oh,
So
man.
she had family members all over this part of the United States
Mm.
looking for that formula and shipping it to them when they found it. And
Wow.
so uh, and it probably costs more than it used to. So some of those things you don't think about,
Yeah.
and what they're doing. And then I think then that just, I think what hit me was the responsibility of a baby. I don't think I thought about it
Mm.
that much of it. It's like kind of like you said with you and Brian. It's like I got to grow up.
Yeah.
There's certain things that just don't need to be a part of my life anymore.
Mhm.
Uh, I think Nancy and I had some friends we'd go out with and go dancing with, and I think we did that once after Grant was born. And that next morning when he woke up, we thought, "Huh, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
This is not good. We have to get out." He
Yeah.
doesn't understand we were out
Yeah.
too late last night.
Yeah.
He didn't get that at all. Uh, and those are the main things that I think come to my mind, of just
Mhm.
things that I've seen couples, and they're all normal stuff, but I just don't think you think of everything. Just kind of
Mhm.
like when you go into marriage, you're in
Mhm.
love and you want to spend the rest of your life with this person, but you didn't know that person, put the toilet paper on the wrong way
Right.
on the roller, and you didn't know that they, left dirty towels. You just didn't, there's things you learn as you go along. And so I
Yeah.
think it's just being open to that and being prepared as much as you can, but there's still going to be some surprises.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's good to go ahead and bust that myth that, you can't prepare for everything. There will be surprises
Absolutely.
and that's just life. You
Yeah.
can't pin it
God will
down.
equip you to do that. Absolutely.
So what are some of the things couples find hard to navigate after baby's born?
Uh, I think for some, and I see this with some guys, is accepting that responsibility of
Mm.
what it is to be a father and a husband, and
Mhm.
to give up some of the things that you can't go hang out with your buddies just
Mhm.
like you did before. There's still things that you can um that just don't, you just can't do. And then I think the other is, how do we continue to put our marriage first? How do we keep it
Mhm.
first? How do we put it first? How do we and realizing that soon enough before you've gotten too far apart,
Mhm.
because I think what happens sometimes is that you continue to do that, and then you become a very child-centered marriage.
Mhm.
And the farther you get in that, I think it just takes that much more effort to come back and put your marriage where God wants it, and that's first. And knowing
Mhm.
that it's okay to put your marriage first. Certainly, when a child's crying, you've got to take care of the child, but and there's needs a child has, you have to take care of. But in the
Mhm.
big picture, that your marriage is first, and your kids need to see that. You
Yeah.
want them to have great marriages, and so if you have a child-centered home, my opinion is the kids don't see a picture of marriage that I think you would want them to see, or God would want them to see. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally. And then, yeah, I think that's really good too because the kids are they do they do not take no for an answer. When they're born, they're gonna cry if they need something and they will keep going. And so your spouse will hopefully not be doing that. If they need something, hopefully they
Right.
will not continue to say, "Mom, mom, 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 mom," like a
Yeah.
child would or a toddler. But that doesn't mean they don't need things too. So I think it's kind of important. And I say this, from a mom perspective of like it's really easy to or sorry, it's really hard to ignore toddlers who are asking for things or children who are asking for things or babies because they make it very obvious what they're asking for. Spouses, sometimes we're not great at that. Sometimes we're not good at saying, "Hey, I feel like you're ignoring me. I don't feel like we're having time together. I feel like we're not as close." We're probably not saying those things as often or as loudly as the children are. So it's
Yeah.
something to be very cognizant of and aware of and to try to stay on the same page together. And then I think, when your spouse does bring something to you, then to take that seriously.
Absolutely. I thought of one of the resources that you guys have developed, our team has developed, and that's our weekly marriage checkup. That would
Mhm.
be, and I've really never thought of it, that would be a great thing to use once you have a baby, because it helps you every
Mhm.
week to touch base with the things that are important in your marriage that you want to be intentional about. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes just having something that draws it to your attention, that you
Mhm.
put in your regular schedule, helps,
Mhm.
because weeks and months can pass and you realize, oh, we really haven't done anything for our marriage. Well, if you've
Mhm.
got something each week, you're kind of focusing on it, and you can say, hey, this is when we're going to have a date night, or this is when we're going to set
Mhm.
aside time for each other, or this is when we're going to talk about our budget.
Yeah.
That it really helps you stay on track with each other. So that's a resource you can get on awesomemarriage.com. Just click resources, and it's a
Mhm.
weekly checkup guide.
Yeah, that's such a good idea. That's a great idea. Yeah, I think too another thing that we sometimes will do, and this is just really simple, but we'll do at dinner time. We'll pray the Lord's Prayer, and where it talks about like forgive us today our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And in that moment, if you're thinking about like, oh, I think I kind of brushed you off when you asked for something today. It kind of helps keep these things between a marriage or between a family short accounts. Keep short accounts so you don't have these things you hold on to. Not to say that that solves all the problems, but it's one of those little ways so you can build a small check-in into your day or small touch point to kind of keep those things in front of you. And I like those kind of things.
I love that, because I think if we don't deal with those and keep short accounts, things kind of build. And
Mhm.
I think then we add something else in, and we take it through that negative framework instead
Mhm.
of, hey, the air's been cleared, we can start over again. So yeah, I think the quicker that we can, I have a lot of couples, I just suggest at least once a week sit down and say, hey, is there anything this week that I offended you with,
Mm,
or that we need to talk about? Get it on the table, deal with it, and start off fresh again.
that's
And
good.
and I and it also gives you information. It helps me know, okay, I didn't realize that bothered you,
Mhm.
Nancy. I didn't realize that. Thanks for telling me that. And
Mhm.
I'm sorry I did that, and I'm going to work to not do that in the future. So it's a way to continue to grow your marriage. There's some accountability to grow your marriage and to keep short accounts. I think that's really helpful.
That's good. Yeah, that's true. But with the temptation to have a child-centered marriage, you're going to treat a toddler like a toddler, a baby like a baby, and as they get older, you should be letting them do more things on their own. They should be able to be more independent and they should not continue to beg and demand and ask. So you'll move out of those seasons, but you also I think sometimes the temptation having a child-centered marriage, you want to keep them in that because it's just a pattern or a habit. And maybe I would find myself doing things for the kids that they could easily do for themselves just out of habit. And I think that's a
Yeah.
component to the child centered thing.
So you're saying let them grow
Let
up.
them grow up. Yeah.
Let them begin the things that are appropriate for the
Hmm.
age they are. Let them do
Let them
that.
do
I
that.
think it's great counsel.
Even
Yeah.
even push back on like, hey, that whining sound you're making. You're going out of that stage. It's time to stop using that voice.
Yes. Yeah, and I think a lot of that happens. I see that in kids as they're going from being a kid to maybe a
Mm,
preteen, and you see them want to be older, and then also you see them acting like maybe they did even younger than their age.
hmm.
And I think that's a struggle that
Yes.
kids go through, which is pretty normal.
Yeah.
And I think you can help in that and say,
Hmm.
when you were 7 and you acted like this, it was kind of normal. Now
Hmm.
that you're 11, that's not. So
Hmm.
what would be an appropriate response to this, and help teach them and train them and guide them?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And then I think too, as a spouses, that kind of frees you up to, you know what, we don't have to do everything for them. We can actually focus on one another because we want to still be good friends and be together long after they've grown up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They do leave.
Yeah, they do. Most of them do.
Yes.
From what I hear. I don't know yet.
Yes. Yeah. I promise they do.
I don't know if that makes me happy or sad, but I'm just going to go with
I know.
it.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the practical ways you dealt with the challenges of becoming parents for you and Nancy?
Communication has always been important to us, and I
Mhm.
think it's important every. I need to know what she was struggling with. I need to know what she was upset with me about. Um, I think we had to learn to talk about how we handle things together. We didn't really we really did well when the kids were little. I think as they got a little older is when we saw some of our parenting differences come in,
Mm.
because of family of origin stuff, because our parents did discipline kind of differently. And so we had those kind of things to talk through. But I think communicating. The other thing I think that really helped, and I had somebody that I can't remember who was shared with me, it was empathy.
Mm.
I needed to be able to put myself in her
Mhm.
shoes, and she needed to be able to put herself in my shoes.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times a husband can feel left out when a baby's born, especially if the mom is nursing, and so the baby
Mhm.
has all that bonding and stuff. And I think some guys do better when the child is a little bit older,
Hmm.
where they can respond to them a little
Yeah.
more. Heard guys say that, but so I think it's being empathetic with each other. And I think some guys that feel kind of shut out, or maybe their sex life is less than, for
Mhm.
a wife to realize, hey, this is still important to him. How do we win, and how do we make this happen, and how do
Mhm.
we continue to nurture each other and do the things that are important to each other? So I think good communication, uh, always being honest and willing to bring things up with each other, and then just being empathetic with each other,
Mhm.
being kind to each other. Those things make such a difference,
Mhm.
whether you have a baby or not. And especially when a child in your life is changing, like it does
Mm.
when a baby comes. I think those things are even more important.
I think that's really good. That's so true. And I think that what that makes me think of the empathy piece when when our kids were really little. I was always sad that they were getting older. I mean, not older, but like going from newborn to just an infant. I love that the little
Yeah.
stage. And so when Brian would go, "Oh, good, they're getting bigger now. They can play and they're fun," and I would go, "Oh no, don't say that. That's not good." It's So we had
Yes.
totally different
What is wrong with
perspective on
you?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
happens a lot,
Exactly.
but neither perspective was wrong. We just saw it differently. So,
No, I think, with a guy, you can't wait till your little boy's old enough that you can help him learn some things, whether it's
yeah.
sports, music, whatever it is that you have that you want to share with
Mhm.
them, and with your daughters too. But
Yeah.
but I think guys kind of want that age to come where they can do some things with
Mhm.
them, and so I think we may rejoice more at, oh, they're a toddler, oh, they're at this age,
Mhm.
than the mom does, as you see that transition.
Yes, yes. It's so true. So what do you think as we kind of start to wrap up, what are some of the most important steps a couple can take to think through the decision if they're ready to have kids?
I think it's always good to make a pro con list.
Mhm.
Write it down together. Take a yellow piece of paper if you still have those. I
Mhm.
keep them around all the time, because they're drawing the line down the middle and
Mhm.
put pros and cons, and then look at it together. Both of you contribute to the list, and then
Mhm.
kind of weigh the pros against the cons, and how big are the cons?
Hmm.
If they're just, hey, I'm just a little afraid, will I be a good parent? Well,
Hmm.
between now and we have the baby, we can go to a parenting class. We
Mhm.
can we can go to a mentor couple, we can do some things to get over that.
Mm.
And so then after you go to that, to try it again, like we talked at the beginning, to be, um, on the same page with it. I think you got to be totally honest with each other.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a concern, you got to get it on the table. And I think the other spouse needs to give you permission to do that.
Mm.
You don't want your spouse to be afraid of putting this on the table or of
Mm-hmm.
talking about this or it upsets you. I think you've got to be totally honest with each other. And that helps you weigh those pros and cons and come to the point of saying, once you do that and you pray, then I think, and you feel that peace that we talked about, then I think you're going to be on the same page with it. And
Mm-hmm.
then it kind of goes in God's hands because he already knows who your child's going to be. And
Yeah.
he knows when that child's going to be born.
Mm-hmm.
And God, I think, is so gracious to us. He helps us, if we take advantage of it, to be prepared when that child comes.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think one thing I would add to that is that if your spouse does have concerns that you don't have, like you said, to give them permission, but also to not dismiss them and not write them off and say, well,
Yes.
that's not a big deal. That'll be fine. Because you don't know. You don't know. Either one of you might be right or wrong, but you won't feel very close if you just dismiss what's something that they're concerned about.
Yeah, and I think maybe there your male femaleness comes out a little bit if
Mm-hmm.
maybe what the husband and wife think or concerned about is different. So it's so important, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
to value that and not dismiss that. And because I think that's stupid, you shouldn't be worried about
Right.
that. I can't say that to Nancy. I've got to
Right.
say, let's talk about that. How do we handle it? Help me understand
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And that way,
things like
I
that.
mean, because all these things are like, if your marriage has some pain points, they're not going to disappear when you have a child. It's just kind of like your
No,
relational stresses didn't disappear when you got married. These
right.
things won't disappear when you have a child either. So you do have to deal with things, and it might be a little difficult, but those differences and balances are really a strength that you can use if you work through them together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, okay, so let's push somebody over the fence if they're not sure. I love children. I think they're great. God says they're a blessing and a gift. What are some of the gifts and joys of having children?
You know, Nancy and I totally enjoyed our kids.
Mhm.
I think from the time when we did like Grant on the on the blanket and the floor
Mhm.
and just stare at him to realize this is a miracle. I mean, God, the human being is just a miracle, and I think
Mhm.
sometimes we're not as much aware of that until you see a baby,
Mm.
and you see just what God did in the mother's womb
Mm.
for this baby to be here. I think the other joys is watching them grow and develop,
Mhm.
and to see, you rejoice. I still remember Grant taking his first step, and it
Mhm.
was like, oh my gosh, we called everybody we knew,
Yeah.
about that. And
Yes.
so you watch them develop and grow. You have fun with them. I think that's such a joy. Is don't miss out on having fun with your kids.
Mhm.
Don't wait for the next stage to have fun. How do I have fun with them in this stage? How do
Yeah.
we do this? I think it's fun to teach them.
Mhm.
I think to teach them about Jesus, to teach them about the things that are important to you. Nancy and I kind of, as our kids grew, we thought of other things that we wanted them to experience before they left home. And so some of it was travel, some was things we want them to read, some of the things, different things like that. And then I think just learning how to love a child well,
Mm.
because we figured out probably when our kids were pretty young that we wanted them to be part of our lives as long as we lived.
Mhm.
And at some point they were going to be adults and they probably were both going to be married and they're going to have their own families. We wanted to have an adult relationship with them that they
Mhm.
valued and we valued. It was a friendship. So that was always a goal out there. We got to discipline, we got to do things like that, but we don't want to do anything that would keep them from valuing the relationship with us when they walk out the door. And that
Mhm.
really came from when I was early into counseling, and I had a young man that was getting ready to go into senior year, and he was looking at colleges, and I said, "Where do you want to go?" And he said, "As far away from home as I can." And
Mhm.
I thought, wow, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want that. And
Mm-mm.
if a kid goes away, that's fine. But I want the reason to be because this school has what I want and what I think I need, and this is why I want to go there, not
Mhm.
because I want to get away from you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so those are kind of the joys, and I think some direction there, a lot of prayer. And
Mhm.
I think when you pray for your kids and you see God, we learned that when maybe we didn't agree on something or we're trying to figure something out, if we would stop and pray, there was not one time that God did not show
Hmm.
up and give us the right direction. And sometimes we did that well, and sometimes we didn't do it well. And when we did, we'd think, why didn't we pray about that?
Yeah.
It's like one of those things that God, learning that God does care and he cares about those kids more than you do,
Mhm.
that he does show up in those situations. And I think that's a joy as you go together in prayer. Pray for your kids, pray for
Mhm.
God's wisdom, his guidance in this, and then you see you've got answers you didn't have without him.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
that
we did that
yeah.
all the time.
And that's a great way to get on the same page too, back on the same page together. Because if you're both kind of looking
Yes.
at God together, you're going in the same direction, and that's helpful.
Ab- Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, I think each stage is just really fun. There's a lot of fun stuff. Like every stage has something different when they're little and they just everything's amazing and they're in wonder of every
Oh,
little thing, and that's just such a fun thing to experience. And then as they grow into their own person and you're like, "Man, I like we shape them some, but really it's God's hand at work from the very beginning."
yes.
And so that's just
Yeah,
a cool thing to be part of.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, any final piece of advice for our listeners today?
This has really been fun, and I hope
Mhm.
we've helped some people that are kind of on that, or what do we or not. And I would say, go through the kind of things we talked about, pray about it, look at your pros and cons, make sure you get on the same page. I think
Mhm.
that is it, and then enjoy every step of it. Enjoy the pregnancy. Enjoy. Hopefully the pregnancy is
Mhm.
not miserable for the
Right.
wife. I've had some people it is,
Mhm.
and some people maybe part of it is, but then when that child comes, just know that God's going to equip you, and
Mhm.
if you seek him and put him first and continue to put each other next, he's going to help you be really good parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And nobody has a perfect parent. That's not possible. There's only one
No.
available is God. The rest of us, we're going to mess up. It's just part of it. And I think what you're saying is like if you're asking God to equip you, he will every step, even though it won't be perfect, it will be what he has planned for you and for your child and family. So that's such a good word.
So well said. Yes.
Well, thank you for covering all this so well, Dr. Kim. I'm just so hopeful that this helps some couples today who are trying
I,
to navigate that together.
yes, and I know there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Yes.
One thing we didn't really talk about is I hear from couples and have since probably the pandemic started of, do I want to bring a child into this world? And
Oh
I think
wow.
that's one of the things that you want to put on your pro con list and talk
Mhm.
that through.
Mhm.
How will you help? Because I think obviously people are going to have kids. We need kids. We need
Right.
young Christian kids growing up that will
Yeah.
run this world
Mhm.
in the future. But so how do we work past those fears? And I
Yeah.
think for some people, those are very real right now.
I think absolutely so. And I don't know that there's ever been a time when that wouldn't enter into the equation somewhere, right? Like at all stages of
Probably.
the world.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, in tons of
Yeah.
visible reasons, but
Sure.
there's always been it's always been a broken world. So it's always really
That's right.
that's very real.
A consideration. Yeah.
Mhm. Man, well, that's a good point too. Well, so far, our anonymous question from a listener this week, this is kind of a fun one to go on the end of this topic, but we have an anonymous question. And this week's question is it okay for a Christian couple planning on having kids to use birth control for a little bit after marriage?
That's a good question. And I think some people probably struggle with that more than others. I think there are some faiths I know that are against birth control.
Mhm.
And I respect that. And I think if you're in that faith, that you've got to follow the beliefs that you believe. So I've never say anything against that. For Nancy and I, we did not have a problem with it. I guess the way I look at it, I think God already knows who my kids are going to be, who our children are going to be, when they'll be born, all those kind of things. And so we just kind of left that to him. And so
Mhm.
I don't think birth control is a problem. And the interesting thing is we had a great neighbor for a few years, and they had 4 children when they moved in, and that was it. They were only 4 children. She went back on birth control. Well, they had 2 more kids while they lived there, and so it's kind of the deal. If God's got a child to get to you, you're going to have that
Yeah.
child, and so I think for the birth control part of it, if that gives you a sense of security, if it helps you know in your own mind that we want some time together before we have kids, I think it's okay. And then
Mhm.
God's gonna do what God's gonna do,
Mhm.
and you don't surprise him if you say, I'm gonna go on birth control. Well, God knew that, and He knew
Yeah.
that when you get off is when He planned on you having His child.
Mm,
And so, I think I think it's for our perspective. I would say I think it's okay.
mhm. Yeah. Well, I hope that that is a helpful answer and takes some of the pressure and stress off. And I think, gosh, what a great point to land on that after the whole conversation we just had, it's in God's hands the whole time. And He's the one who creates the life, sustains it from the very
Absolutely.
beginning. So that's a
Yep.
great place to land. So, if you are subscribed to our One Thing email, you have the option to submit your own anonymous question for Dr. Kim anytime, right in that email. And if you're not, make sure you sign up for that today. The link to sign up for the One Thing is always in our show notes. So, remember that you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram, and Dr. Kim is on TikTok. And of course, we always welcome your emails at info@awesomemarriage if you have questions or would like prayer or if there's anything else you need from us. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.